Most women can remember the very first time they were told to be grateful. Not the warm, genuine gratitude that comes naturally when someone shows kindness. No, the type of gratitude that feels like a thin leash wrapped gently around a young girl's throat. A reminder that wanting too much, needing too much, speaking too loudly, could make her difficult. And difficult girls, she learned early, don't get chosen, don't get loved, don't get protected. It often begins subtly. A little girl reaches for more attention, more fairness, more understanding, and someone sighs as if she's asking for the moon. You should be grateful for what you have. The sentence lands softly, but the shame it plants doesn't stay soft. It grows roots. By the time she's a teenager, she has become fluent in the art of self-minimizing. When something hurts, she shrinks it. When something feels unfair, she swallows it. When something inside her whispers that life is heavier than it should be, she wraps that whisper in a smile big enough to convince everyone else she's fine. Gratitude becomes the armor she wears to survive a world that finds her easier to love when she doesn't complain. And in America, where independence is celebrated loudly, but emotional needs are often handled quietly, women become experts at burying their own discomfort beneath a polished image of strength. A woman who sacrifices is respected. A woman who endures is admired. A woman who wants more? She is told she's ungrateful. This conditioning shapes an entire culture. You've seen it. The mother who hasn't slept in years but assures everyone she feels blessed. The wife who carries the emotional weight of an entire household, yet reassures others she's lucky to have a good man. The ambitious woman who dreams of more fulfilling work, but wrestles with guilt, telling herself, I should be thankful I even have a job. Gratitude, once something sacred, becomes something weaponized, turned not toward healing, but toward silencing. And beneath it all sits a pressure so old it feels inherited. There are women who describe this pressure like standing in a crowded room, smiling politely while something inside their chest quietly withers. They talk about the loneliness that comes from feeling emotions they're not allowed to express. They talk about the confusion of wanting more while also wanting to be good. They talk about lying awake at night, feeling something heavy pressing against the ribs, something unnamed and forbidden. They talk about the guilt that rises whenever they reach for joy that doesn't come from serving others. Even now, as adults, many women carry inside them a version of the little girl who learned gratitude meant staying small. She lives quietly beneath every decision, every apology that wasn't necessary. Every moment, a woman bites back the truth because she doesn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And she appears most clearly during moments of conflict. Moments when a woman feels sadness or anger and immediately feels guilty for feeling it, as if the discomfort itself is a sin. There's a particular kind of sadness in this. A sadness not loud enough to be recognized as pain, but deep enough to sink a woman slowly over time. You can see it in her eyes when she says, I shouldn't complain. Others have it worse. You can hear it in her voice when she convinces herself she's fine. You can feel it in the way she moves through life with a quiet tension, like holding her breath without realizing it. But sadness isn't the only emotion hiding beneath this conditioning. There's anger, too. Anger toward the expectations placed on her. Anger toward the parts of society that benefit from her silence. Anger toward herself for not speaking sooner. Anger that feels dangerous because she was never allowed to hold it, let alone express it. Anger she translates into guilt because guilt feels safer than rage. And there's fear. Fear that if she stops performing gratitude, people will pull away. Fear that saying, I need help will make her a burden. Fear that choosing herself will make her unlovable. Fear that one honest moment could shatter the fragile illusion that everything is okay. But mixed in with the fear, strangely, is a quiet flicker of hope. A hope that whispers, maybe there's more for me. Hope that feels rebellious. Hope that feels like disobedience. Hope that feels like stepping into sunlight after living too long in someone else's shadow. This small spark of hope is often the first sign that something inside her is still alive, still reaching. For some women, this spark arrives during moments of stillness, while driving alone at night, or while sitting in the passenger seat staring out a window, or while standing at the kitchen sink long after the house has gone quiet. It's that sudden, simple realization that despite all the things she's grateful for, she is not okay. And that realization terrifies her as much as it frees her. A woman begins to see the invisible weight she's been carrying only when she lets herself consider the possibility that she deserves more. More ease, more safety, more joy, more truth, more space, more breath. And the moment she lets herself see this, even for a second, something cracks open. That crack isn't weakness, it's light. It's astonishing how a single moment of honesty can shift the entire architecture of a woman's inner world. A moment when she notices she's been smiling for too long, apologizing for too much, thanking people for giving her less than she deserves. A moment when she looks at her reflection and sees not someone ungrateful, but someone tired of pretending. Someone who wants a life that feels real rather than respectable. Gratitude itself was never the problem. Women always knew how to appreciate. They always knew how to love. They always knew how to care. The problem was what society asked them to sacrifice in exchange for approval. Their needs, their boundaries, their dreams, their truth. When gratitude becomes a rule instead of a feeling, it stops being beautiful. When it becomes a command instead of a choice, it stops being healing. When it becomes a shield used against a woman's honesty, it stops being gratitude at all. And slowly, she begins to wonder what her life would look like if gratitude didn't require her to disappear. If she could be grateful and dissatisfied, grateful and ambitious, grateful and exhausted, grateful and human. That question alone can change everything. Sarah used to believe her life made sense. Everyone around her said it did, and she tried to feel the truth of their words the way you try to feel the warmth of a sun that never actually reaches your skin. She would wake up every morning to the gentle weight of her daughter curled beside her, the soft rustle of her son's footsteps down the hallway, and Mark humming in the kitchen as he brewed coffee. It looked like a postcard version of happiness, the kind people envy on social media: sunlight through curtains, a tidy kitchen, 2 healthy kids, a husband who didn't cheat, drink excessively, or disappear. What more could a woman ask for, they said. What more should she want? She held on to that word, should, for longer than she realized. It guided her through each day like an invisible hand pressed against the center of her back, nudging her forward even when she was too tired to move. Should made her smile at parties. Should made her volunteer for bake sales. Should made her accept the uneven division of labor in her marriage because Mark works hard and because everyone agreed she was lucky. She wore that luck like a badge pinned to her chest, and it gleamed so brightly that no one noticed the way it burned her skin. The pressure built slowly, the way water seeps under a door until the floorboards swell and begin to warp. She kept a mental list so long it never stopped unfurling. Doctor appointments, school lunches, birthday gifts, cleaning schedules, emotional check-ins, bedtime routines. Every day felt like chasing a train she was already on. But Sarah didn't complain. Complaining felt dangerous, ungrateful, wrong. She had a beautiful life, she reminded herself constantly. She whispered it the way some people whisper prayers. But prayers don't fix exhaustion. They just give you something to hold while you fall apart. Sarah had small moments when her truth tried to surface. A quiet sadness when she looked out the window at dusk. A flicker of resentment when Mark came home, kissed her forehead, and immediately relaxed because she had already done everything. A hollow ache when she tucked the kids into bed and realized she couldn't remember the last time someone asked how she was doing. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. She would push those thoughts away quickly, as if they were indecent. She didn't want to be the kind of woman who wasn't grateful. But the more she pushed them down, the heavier they became. There was a night when sleep felt impossible. She lay awake, watching the ceiling breathe shadows as the fan turned slowly above her. Mark slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the silent storm building inches away. Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet the restless thrum beneath her ribs. It felt like sadness had turned into something else, a creature pacing the length of her heart, trapped, desperate, clawing. She wondered if anyone else felt this way. If any other woman lay beside a husband she loved and felt both affection and loneliness wrapped together so tightly they were indistinguishable. The guilt was the worst part. Guilt for being tired. Guilt for wanting a break. Guilt for wanting to feel seen. Guilt for feeling resentment toward a man who had never truly hurt her. Guilt for wanting something she couldn't even name. It spread through her like heat, flushing her cheeks, curling into her stomach, tightening her throat. Every woman has her own language for guilt. Sarah's sounded like a whisper repeating, "You have no right to feel this way." She tried gratitude journaling again. 3 things she was grateful for, every night. A ritual she hoped would disinfect the parts of her heart that felt infected with wanting. She wrote about her home, her children, her marriage. She wrote about safety and stability. She wrote until her hand cramped, until her eyes blurred, until her heart felt smaller and smaller under the weight of her own handwriting. She didn't realize she was using gratitude as a weapon against herself, cutting off every emotion that didn't fit the image of a good woman. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that looked like any other. The kind of day that proves collapse doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks tired. She had rushed home after work, picked up the kids, helped with homework, folded laundry, and started dinner. The house buzzed with the familiar chaos of family life, but Sarah moved through it mechanically, her smile stretched thin, her shoulders tight. She was stirring spaghetti when Mark walked through the door, dropped his keys on the counter, and asked casually, "What's for dinner? I'm starving." There was nothing cruel in his voice, no accusation, just a question, a normal, harmless question. But something inside her, something she had silenced for years, rose sharply, violently, like a wave breaking against a brittle shore. The plate slipped from her hands and shattered across the floor, red sauce spreading like a bruise across the tiles. The sound startled everyone. The kids froze. Mark stepped forward, confused. Sarah stared at the mess as tears fell fast, hot, uncontrollable. It wasn't the spaghetti. It wasn't the long day. It wasn't the spilled dinner. It was the weight, every invisible task, every swallowed emotion, every forced smile, finally too heavy to hold. Mark knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Hey, it's okay. It's just a plate, don't cry. We have so much to be thankful for." The words were meant to soothe, but they struck her like a slap. They told her, once again, that her pain was inconvenient, that her exhaustion could be erased by gratitude. that her feelings were less real than the perception of a perfect life. For the first time, she couldn't swallow the ache. She felt anger, the kind that comes from years of being quiet. She felt sorrow, the kind that pools in places too deep to reach. She felt fear that this was all there was. She felt disgust at herself for pretending for so long. She felt surprise that it had taken only one sentence to crack her entirely open. And beneath it all, she felt the faintest pulse of joy, fragile but present, simply because something in her had finally spoken, even through tears. The mess on the floor wasn't just dinner. It was the truth she had been avoiding. A truth that refused to stay silent anymore. When Sarah finally stopped crying that night, when the sauce had dried into dark streaks on the tiles and the children had disappeared into their rooms with wide, unsettled eyes, there was a strange stillness in the house. Not peaceful, not comforting. A hollow quiet, the kind that follows an earthquake. Mark tried to help, hovering awkwardly, picking up pieces of shattered ceramic as if fixing the broken plate could somehow stitch the moment back together. But Sarah couldn't look at him. Not because she was angry at him, though anger simmered deep in her bones, but because she was terrified of the truth that had finally surfaced inside her. For years, she had been living in a body that learned to bury its own alarms, a mind that learned to mistrust itself, a heart that learned to apologize before it ever dared feel. She had no idea how much damage that silence had done until it spilled out into the open in the shape of exploding grief and trembling hands. Most women never see that damage forming. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It forms grain by grain, the way dust settles on a shelf. So slowly, you only notice it when you can write your name in it. Some of the damage is emotional, some psychological, some almost physical. But all of it is invisible unless you are the one living in that skin. There is a specific kind of sadness women carry when gratitude becomes a cage. It's a sadness that hides behind their smiles, beneath their achievements, inside their perfectly arranged routines. A sadness made of moments they never allowed themselves to feel. A sadness thick enough to be swallowed, but too heavy to ever really digest. Sarah had felt this sadness for years without recognizing it. It was the quiet ache that crawled into her chest on nights she stayed awake staring at the ceiling. It was the sense of being surrounded yet lonely. It was the soft grief of realizing she had become an observer in her own life. But sadness wasn't the only thing shaping her from the inside. There was a quieter hormone that rewired her brain in ways she never gave herself permission to notice. Every time she told herself, "I should be grateful," her mind learned that discomfort was a personal failure. Every time she forced herself to smile, her nervous system learned that honesty was dangerous. Every time she silenced her anger, her body treated it like poison to be absorbed rather than released. She didn't know that prolonged self-silencing could actually change a brain. That chronic suppression keeps the amygdala on constant alert. That women who silence themselves often show higher markers of cortisol and inflammation. That when a woman denies her own emotions long enough, her body begins to speak for her through exhaustion, tightness, headaches, irritability, and burnout. None of this was weakness. It was biology begging to be heard. The anger she felt wasn't pointless rage. It was a natural reaction to long-term dismissal both from others and from herself. Anger, when denied, becomes something corrosive, not because anger is wrong, but because it has nowhere to go. It circles inside a woman like a storm trapped in a jar. Sarah had kept her storm sealed for so long that even she believed it wasn't there. But storms don't disappear. They wait. Fear grew in the cracks left behind. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being seen as ungrateful. Fear of being unloved if she asked for more. Fear that her feelings were too big, too messy, too inconvenient. Fear that wanting a fuller life made her selfish. Fear is a masterful puppeteer. It pulls at women quietly, tugging them into compliance while convincing them the strings don't exist. Then there was disgust, a feeling she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Disgust at her own exhaustion. Disgust at the way she kept sacrificing parts of herself. Disgust at pretending everything was fine. Disgust at the voice inside her that begged for something different. Women often confuse disgust with shame, and shame is easier to live with than disgust. Shame says, something is wrong with me. Disgust says, something around me is harming me. But Sarah wasn't ready to name which one was true. And yet, strangely, joy flickered beneath the rubble. A hesitant kind of joy, fragile and trembling like a single candle in a dark room. Joy because something inside her had finally broken open. Joy because her truth, however painful, had finally escaped. Joy because, for the first time in years, she wasn't lying to herself. Even grief can bring relief when it's honest. The deeper damage showed up in her relationships, not just with Mark, but with everyone around her. She had become the emotional caretaker of every space she entered. She anticipated needs before they were spoken. She adjusted herself to keep the peace. She absorbed disappointment so others wouldn't feel it. She stretched herself thin to maintain harmony. Gratitude had become the currency she used to buy acceptance. And the cost was her authenticity. Mark wasn't a bad man. He was simply a man raised in a system that taught him women absorb the emotional labor of the home. He didn't know Sarah was drowning because she never let him see her head go under. The world taught him she was fine. The world taught her she should be. The tragedy is that both of them believed it. But the truth is that toxic gratitude doesn't make relationships stronger. It makes them quieter. Quieter until one day the quiet becomes unbearable, and a woman realizes she has been alone in a relationship she never meant to face alone. Sarah wasn't broken because she exploded. She was breaking long before that plate hit the floor. Years of unvoiced emotions had been building like pressure inside a sealed room, and her body simply stopped being able to hold it. The shattering wasn't the damage. The shattering was the evidence of it. And once she finally saw the cost of her silence, she couldn't unsee it. The morning after the plate shattered, Sarah woke to a silence that felt heavier than noise. She lay still for a long time, staring at the faint outline of sunlight pressing through the curtains. The house was awake. She could hear the soft thud of small footsteps, the murmured voices of the children, the kettle heating on the stove. But there was a distance between her and those sounds, as if she were listening from underwater. She didn't know what to call the feeling that sat in her chest. It wasn't exactly sadness, though sadness was there. It wasn't shame, though shame clung to the edges of every memory from the night before. It wasn't anger, though a heat lingered low in her stomach. It wasn't fear, though the thought of facing Mark made her want to hide beneath the blanket and never emerge. What she felt was something murkier, something like standing barefoot on the threshold between two worlds, uncertain which one would collapse if she stepped forward. But she knew something had cracked open inside her. And once light enters a wound, it changes everything. She went through the motions of the morning almost silently, packing lunches with trembling hands, tying shoelaces, brushing her daughter's hair while trying not to let tears fall onto the small, warm shoulder beneath her palm. Her son hugged her tighter than usual before leaving for school, his eyes searching her face with a grown-up worry a child shouldn't carry. She kissed the top of his head and felt another kind of ache rise, one made of guilt and tenderness, mixed into something too complicated to untangle. When the door finally closed behind them, the house exhaled. Mark hovered in the kitchen, unsure how close he was allowed to stand. The night before had unsettled him in ways he wasn't equipped to understand. He didn't know how to approach a woman who had been breaking quietly for years. His confusion softened her anger for a moment, but it didn't erase the truth that had surfaced. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from, staring at the steam swirling up and vanishing. It reminded her of how her own needs had dissolved over time, visible for a moment, then swallowed by the air. Mark sat across from her, careful, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at the slightest sound. "I didn't know you felt that overwhelmed," he finally said. The words were simple, but they cracked something open in her again. Not violently this time, more like a small piece of ice thawing. She wanted to scream that she had been drowning in plain sight. She wanted to sob into his chest until all the years of quiet suffering melted out of her. She wanted to run away and start over in a place where no one expected her to survive on gratitude alone. But instead, she whispered, "I didn't know how to say it." The moment hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. This, she realized, was the first step toward reclaiming herself, telling the truth out loud, even if the truth trembled. For years, she had believed that voicing her pain meant becoming ungrateful. But maybe silence had been the real betrayal, not of her family, but of herself. The realization settled slowly, filling her with a mix of relief and grief so intertwined she couldn't tell one from the other. She didn't suddenly transform into a woman who could name her needs easily. She didn't find instant clarity or a perfect script. Healing rarely looks dramatic. It often begins with tiny confessions whispered into quiet kitchens after years of pretending everything is fine. As she sat there, Sarah felt something shift, not in the room, but inside her own mind. She had spent years twisting gratitude into a punishment, a script she repeated to avoid the discomfort of wanting more. Gratitude had become the cage, but now she touched the bars for the first time and felt them loosen. It surprised her how much fear she felt at this. Freedom sounds beautiful, but it requires unlearning. It requires stepping into unfamiliar air. It requires believing you deserve the breath you take. She walked through the rest of her day with a raw sort of awareness. She noticed how often she apologized for small things. She noticed how she instinctively minimized her feelings. She noticed how guilt rose like a tide the moment she allowed herself to rest. Every moment of recognition stung, like touching a bruise she didn't know was there. But awareness was also a kind of awakening, a quiet, persistent flame building inside her. A flame that brought warmth, even if it also illuminated everything she wished she hadn't ignored. Later that evening, when the children were asleep and the house finally settled, Mark found her sitting at the edge of the bed. He sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, but far enough not to intrude. There was fear in his eyes, and love, and confusion, and a kind of sorrow that made her chest tighten. "I want to understand," he said gently. "Just tell me what you need." The question struck her harder than he realized. For so long she had forgotten she was allowed to need anything at all. Her throat tightened, and she lowered her gaze, afraid of the answer waiting inside her. What did she need? The truth didn't come as a sentence. It came as a feeling, soft, trembling, undeniable. She needed space. She needed partnership. She needed acknowledgement. She needed rest. She needed the freedom to be a full human being, not a symbol of female endurance wrapped in gratitude. She lifted her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let herself be seen without the armor of, "I'm fine." Her voice came out small but steady. "I need to stop pretending." Mark didn't speak right away. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. His touch brought a flicker of comfort and a flicker of grief. Both were real. Both were allowed. The moment felt like the first inhale after holding her breath for too long. Not a resolution, not a happy ending, just a beginning. A crack in the pattern. A small rebellion against a lifetime of silence. And within that rebellion, a fragile joy stirred. Because for the first time, Sarah wasn't disappearing inside her gratitude. She was emerging from it. Sarah didn't wake up the next morning as a transformed woman. She didn't suddenly know how to name every emotion or articulate every need. She didn't glow with some newfound sense of empowerment. Healing rarely announces itself with trumpets. It arrives quietly, the way dawn creeps over the horizon, soft, slow, unnoticed until you realize the darkness has lifted. She noticed the first shift in the smallest of places. When she walked past the hallway mirror, she didn't immediately look away. She didn't force a smile to convince herself she was okay. She simply paused, studying the woman reflected back at her. Her eyes weren't bright, but they weren't empty. There was a tenderness there she hadn't seen in years. A gentleness usually reserved for her children, but rarely for herself. It startled her, that tiny moment of recognition. It felt like meeting an old friend she'd forgotten existed. Throughout the day, she found herself listening differently to her own body, her own breath, her own fatigue. Instead of dismissing the ache in her shoulders, she acknowledged it. Instead of rushing through breakfast, she tasted it. Instead of brushing aside her irritation when Mark left his coffee mug in the sink, she let the feeling rise without shaming herself for it. These were small things, almost invisible any other day. But today, they felt like a woman picking up pieces of herself she didn't know she'd dropped. There was fear to fear that this small awakening would vanish if she blinked. Fear that she was being selfish. Fear that every step toward herself was a step away from her family. Fear that she didn't deserve this softness she was trying to learn. That fear pulsed beneath her ribs, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always there. Yet for the first time, she didn't treat fear as the enemy. She treated it as a sign that something inside her was shifting, loosening, expanding. That night, after the children were asleep, the house a gentle hush around her, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed with a heaviness that didn't feel like exhaustion, more like the weight of truth settling into place. Mark sat beside her again, the way he had the night before, but there was something different in his posture. Less confusion, more humility. A quiet willingness to see her, not just the version of her the world admired. "You seemed lighter today," he said softly. The comment warmed her and stung her at the same time. Lighter. As if she'd been carrying something enormous that he had only started noticing now. It wasn't his fault entirely. She had hidden her exhaustion with the precision of a magician. But hearing him say it out loud made anger flare briefly inside her. Not rage, but the kind of anger that comes from being unseen for too long. She breathed through it, letting the warmth of the feeling anchor her rather than consume her. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm finally starting to feel what I've been trying not to feel." Mark nodded, and the sincerity in his expression softened her edges. "If you want to talk about it, I'm here. I want to understand." She wasn't ready to spill everything. Not yet. Some parts of her were still fragile, still learning how to exist outside silence. But she reached for his hand, not out of habit, but out of choice. That small difference mattered more than any explanation she could give. Over the next few days, Sarah continued to test the boundaries of her reclaimed self. She allowed herself to rest without earning it first. She said no to a school volunteer event without justifying her decision. She asked Mark to handle dinner one evening, not apologetically, not timidly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally recognized her needs as valid. Each act felt like peeling away another layer of the old version of herself, the one who believed gratitude meant shrinking. The world hadn't taught her how to expand without guilt. She was learning now, slowly, imperfectly, with trembling hands but a steadier heart. There were setbacks too, moments when guilt surged so sharply it stole her breath. Moments when old habits tugged at her ankles, begging her to return to the familiar performance of being the good woman. Moments when she felt disgust at herself for wanting more, as if desire were something dirty she should scrub off. Moments when sadness rolled in like an unexpected tide, reminding her of how long she had abandoned her own soul. But each time, that small spark of joy flickered back to life. Joy not from perfection, but from presence. Joy from feeling something real. Joy from reclaiming even a single inch of her inner landscape. One evening, she found herself standing in the backyard alone, listening to the distant hum of cars and the soft chirp of night insects. The sky above her was wide, heavy with stars she rarely took the time to notice. She tilted her head back, letting the cool air wash over her skin, and for a moment she felt something she hadn't felt in years, an unmistakable sense of being alive. Not productive, not useful, not grateful in the performative way she had been taught, simply alive. It was then she understood something profound. Gratitude was never meant to be a cage. It was meant to be a window, a lens through which to appreciate, not a lock to keep her from reaching for more. She had mistaken the lock for the window because that's what she was taught. But standing there under the stars, she felt the difference with startling clarity. She returned inside that night, calmer, not because everything was fixed, but because something essential within her had shifted. She knew she couldn't go back to invisibility, even if the world preferred her that way. She knew she wouldn't let gratitude erase her again. She knew she would ask for help, speak her truth, feel her anger, claim her joy, rest when she needed to, and love without abandoning herself. She knew she deserved to be whole. When she finally crawled into bed, Mark stirred, half asleep. He reached for her hand instinctively. This time, she didn't give him the practiced squeeze she always offered. Instead, she held his hand in a way that said, "I am here, but so am I." This was the woman she was becoming. Not louder, not harsher, not ungrateful. Just honest, rooted, unhidden. A woman who could feel deeply without drowning, love fiercely without disappearing, and choose gratitude without sacrificing her truth. Sarah realized that returning to herself wasn't a destination. It was a devotion, a daily choosing of the woman she refused to lose again. And for the first time in her life, that choice felt like freedom.